and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Inspired Live, all about hiring with confidence and how to assess real expertise in the age of AI. I'm Verity, Associate Director at Inspired, the award-winning publishing, recruitment and executive search consultancy, and I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic guest speakers who both bring different but very complementary perspectives to hiring and talent. So in no particular order, I'll introduce them both. Firstly, we have Chantal Hayward, founder and director of Fox Fable, and currently, or just recently finished, an interim role of head of HR at Quarto Publishing. And Chantal is a senior HR professional, leadership coach and chartered fellow of the CIPD with over 18 years experience helping organisations navigate the challenges that come with growth from a people perspective, and is brilliantly placed to share an HR and people-focused perspective on today's topic. Welcome, Chantal. Now, I'll also introduce you to Katie. Katie Thorn is VP International Sales and Marketing at Macmillan Learning. And I've had the pleasure of partnering with Katie over the years on various hiring processes. Many of the conversations we've had more recently around hiring and assessing genuine capability and people's potential and fit in today's AI-enabled world were actually the inspiration behind today's discussion. So thank you for that, Katie. Katie brings a hugely practical hiring manager point of view, having built and led teams across multiple markets and functions throughout her career. So welcome, Katie and Chantal, and thank you so much for joining us today. As we all know, AI is becoming a bigger part of how candidates apply for jobs and how they prepare for interviews and present their experience. And many hiring managers are asking themselves, ourselves included, how do we really identify people's true expertise and potential and fit for a role, and do that with confidence? And earlier this week, we actually launched an inspired poll of the week on this topic, asking our network about how they're best assessing genuine candidate expertise, and the responses so far have been really interesting and just shows how much this conversation today is resonating across HR, talent, people professionals and hiring teams. So we'll share the results of that poll next week, so do keep an eye out for that. So today we'll be exploring ways to really look at people's capability beyond the CV, thinking about hiring processes that are robust and human-centered, and think about how to create a really positive candidate experience as well, while still making confident hiring decisions. Throughout today's discussion, we'd really welcome the audience to share your thoughts and any questions as we go in the comments. We'll save time for the Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'll just jump into the first question with you, Chantal, if that's all right. Now, AI is clearly changing how candidates present themselves, but from what you're seeing, Chantal, how has that actually shifted the way we need to assess people during a hiring process, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think in some ways, actually, AI hasn't significantly changed in terms of what good hiring looks like, because it's actually in some ways highlighted what weaknesses were already there. And so what I mean is, for years we've relied on really CVs and interviews, which actually people could always polish in different ways. And obviously now they do with the assistance of AI. But AI is there to help, people are using it to make their CVs even more polished than they were before. And I think whilst AI can help with that, and we still need to be really curious in terms of when we're meeting with candidates and they're going through the recruitment process about the key skills that we're actually recruiting for when we think about the role that we're recruiting for. So it might be things like a candidate's judgment or their learnings and their growth mindset, or it might be their relationships with people, depending on the role that we're asking them to do. And so rather than always asking, can this person write a great application or a great CV, we could be thinking, can they think critically, or can they solve problems? Can they collaborate? Can they learn? And thinking about things more from that perspective, which I think is really helpful. And I think using AI is actually now a real workplace skill. We talk about AI on a daily basis, don't we, at work, outside of work as well. And it's a skill that forward-thinking organisations should be really be looking for in candidates. So I don't necessarily think that we should be thinking, has a candidate used AI? That's a bad thing. Actually, we want them to use AI, but to use it well and to use it effectively. And in terms of how they can do that, it might be things like, if you see a CV, for example, you're looking at it and they've used AI, or you feel like they've used AI, has it actually improved the output? So have they used it effectively to kind of enhance what they're offering? Or can we see lots of M dashes and the generic AI language that we're all familiar with? And have they challenged what AI has produced as well? So if actually they progress to interview stage, if you ask them questions about their CV, does it then appear that actually they've just used AI and they can't go any deeper? Or actually, are you able to probe and really explore their questions, and they're really able to answer those effectively? So you can see that they've actually used those skills, have that experience, but just use AI to help enhance in terms of the way they position themselves. And do they personalize it as well? So does it sound like them when you actually get to meet with them, or they're using words that don't really resonate with how they came across in their CV or application? And also importantly, have they used it in a really ethically and compliant way? So if you're seeing a CV or application that's full of what might be sensitive company data about figures and income and revenue, things like that, or client information, again, that would be concerning because they're not using the data in the right way and putting it into AI, which would be concerning. So I think how candidates are using it in their application is actually helpful to look at and to think about, because actually when you want them to come into your organisation, you might want them to use AI, and I think a lot of, as I say, forward-thinking organisations do. So it's great to see those skills and actually use them in their application. Therefore, hopefully they should be able to use those similar skills in how they work in the role as well. So I think that's really important to look at. And as I say, the world is really changing. We talked about with AI, we really that growth mindset. And so I would want to see if an organisation, somebody's joining our organisation, can they really use AI effectively? Are they able to use tools effectively? And beyond the ChatGPT and the Claude that we often talk about, but there's a plethora of AI tools out there. So are they actually able to demonstrate they can use them as well? And I've seen applications that some companies now, which previously used to say, please don't use AI in your application because they were a bit guarded about it. And now I've seen more recently, and some of the organisations I've worked with have actually asked questions saying, tell us about how you use AI in your day-to-day role. And the opportunity for candidates to showcase their skills there as well. So I think it's a real opportunity and great for people to be able to talk about how they use it in an effective way.
Yeah, absolutely, Chantal. No, I couldn't agree more. And you've touched on so much there. And clearly, as we all know, hiring processes are evolving all the time, and we are starting to challenge those more traditional approaches or methods, and being able to embrace tools and technologies like AI and see how people can showcase their skill sets in different ways by bringing that within the application process is a really valuable way to see just how it can be harnessed. Thank you, Chantal. Now on to you, Katie. Tell me, do you think hiring has become harder as a result of today's AI-enabled world, or is it more about needing to rethink how we make decisions and what we're really looking for? What do you think?
Yeah, interesting question. I don't think it's become harder. I think, as Chantal said, actually, it's changing. And I think it's changing then as a result, as a hirer, to what you look for. So I don't know, if I take maybe the covering letter as an example, it used to be, it was a hard process, right? It was all down to the covering letter. How do you pull out from your CV and match it meticulously to what the job description is asking for? It was a hard piece of work. It was a human piece of work. Took a bit of rewriting and sense checking. Sometimes it's a bit tedious. Have I missed anything out? What have I been? All of that. Now, AI is obviously totally brilliant at that. Take a CV, take a job description, make it match really well. And that's good. But now I need to look for something different as a hirer. I can't just look for a really good match of a candidate to the skills in the job role I'm hiring for. So actually, I look for more sophisticated prompting. Have they done a generic prompt which makes a really good match? Or have they done more that makes it a better covering letter? There's more human elements to it. And I think increasingly brevity is something I really look for. I think AI can, if you're a bit lazy with it, you get the first output and it's quite verbose. And in a recent hiring process, I had 2 covering letters that were almost identical, totally different candidates, almost identical. And I thought, oh, this is more hard. And it's kind of a bit of a boring task then as the hirer to be going through this. So yeah, if I was to think about how it's changed just at the covering letter level, brevity, I really look for that. And I really like a story. So something that feels quite personal and then pulls different skills and attributes that I'm looking for. On LinkedIn recently, when people are placing posts, then often putting at the bottom now written by a human. So I'm wondering whether the covering letter will evolve to something like that in the future, just to kind of to get away from that. But no doubt about it, AI is enormously helpful in, making sure you get that kind of polished output and the good matches and so on. But yeah, then on the receiving end, you have to think about, if there's a lot of those, how do you make the potential hirer feel? So
yeah, so true. You almost have to change the way you're looking at the applications that you receive and how you decide whether to move an application forward or not. And as you say, if you've got 2 identical cover letters of completely different profiles, it's a bit of a no-go, because they are often so polished. And Chantal, when applications and interviews feel more polished than ever, as described there by Katie, how might you suggest, from your incredible HR background, you could design a process that really helps you get someone's true self, an understanding of their capabilities in the reality?
Yeah, absolutely. And Katie's given a great example there about the covering letters and the 2 identical ones from candidates. And I think it's really about looking at kind of multiple data points when you're going through the recruitment process. Look at CVs and applications. It could be looking at presentation tasks as well. And I think that's really helpful, because whether it's a conversation or a practical exercise or meeting colleagues or future colleagues, it can really give us a sense of that person and also allow that person to shine as well in different ways. Not everyone is amazing at interviews, but actually might be really good at a presentation task, or a key element of the role might be having really good relationships. Actually, if they meet potential future colleagues, whether it's like an informal coffee, that can be a great way to use those skills as well. So I've really thought about that when working with organisations, in terms of what are the different elements, the key elements that we're looking for in the role, the key criteria, and built it up based on that. So often, for example, the CV might be kind of the first point, really looking at the basic fit within the role and their skill set. Might use an interview to think about their motivation and their thinking and for the role and interest in the role, which is really important. And then the task or presentation might assess their capability and their skills. And then, as I say, meeting colleagues is great to look at their people relationships and their collaboration skills as well. And then even the final process, the references, although unfortunately references are quite standard these days, aren't they? Don't give too much information. Sometimes you can get a more detailed one, which again can measure that consistency. So actually everything they've told you, and Katie talked about the story of their journey, their experience, their skills, does that marry up as well with the reference that's been provided as a final check? And I think each helpful to reveal something different at each stage in terms of what that candidate can offer, and whether they're right for the organisation and whether the organisation's right for them as well. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And just touching on there, your mention of the different formats where you can look to, assess a candidate's capabilities, and thinking about the more what might be described as nowadays traditional or old-fashioned method of asking a candidate to do a presentation. That's sometimes got its pros and cons, because from a candidate perspective, of course, it means that you're going in prepared, you've thought it through in advance, and that's a really nice position to be in. But on the flip side, if you don't necessarily have that time to allow you to do that and do all the preparation that comes with it, you're automatically at a disadvantage. People have so many commitments going on. So to be able to juggle the presentation task as well, it can be a big ask. And when thinking about a live scenario, if you have a live scenario, they're all going in on level playing fields, and therefore they have the beauty of having to just think on the feet and be human and have that much more approach-centered way of being assessed, thinking about how is this person going to work in reality in that day-to-day, and what is their approach. So it's really interesting to see the different formats that are coming out of the woodwork in today's AI-enabled world. Thank you, Chantal. And Katie, from your perspective, what might you say gives you confidence that someone can actually deliver in the role, not just interview?
Yeah, again, a good question, and interesting as Chantal, you were answering yours. I was thinking I'm going to say almost the same things, but just from the angle. So I'm liking that alignment. That's really good. I mean, recently I think I've chosen more in-person touch points. So interview, yes, but also maybe more people and more casual meeting of more people, even getting members of the team to meet their new future manager. So I'm really looking for more kind of consistent feedback across a candidate from a lot of people. I mean, not endlessly. You don't want this to drag out. It's got to be very well timed and quite punchy, of course. But I do think that helps really tease out whether someone can deliver in a role. And Chantal, you mentioned the CV, and I kind of feel like there's more power in the CV. I felt like the power was in the covering letter, and now I think that the power is shifted to the CV, and I really look for experience they've had, and then being able to really dive down in an interview, understanding, you know, what was their tasks in a particular role, what were they asked to do, and then what their role in getting those things done what was the effect, and so on. So quite a lot of, I mean, I always call it my sales background experience, quite a lot of deep probing to really understand how someone approaches things rather than just what they think about an answer to a question. So I think there's quite a lot going on there, but I think, yeah, definitely the more human touch points where you can, which isn't always easy, because if you're going into a hybrid office environment as well, and there's always a stage that's maybe online in the process, but making sure you're getting some in-person where possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll be glad to know, Katie, recent processes we've partnered with you on, the feedback has always been incredible from the candidate's perspective, describing it as, you know, one of the most refreshing interview formats that they've come across. And I think it does help having those touch points across the team, as you mentioned, because it really enables someone to come into the organisation and into the role having their eyes wide open and a really holistic kind of 360 view of what they're coming into, and equally allows you as the decision maker to get that perspective from different individuals, so making sure that you're not being biased towards one person or another, and you can match them up against, you know, specific deliverables for that role, and come together, regroup, and think about the different candidates and how they performed across the different stages. So I love hearing that, Katie. Now on to our next question. One for you again, Katie. When you think about things like tasks or case studies even, and presentations, what have you seen works best in helping candidates show what they can actually do?
Yeah, so I mean, we made a recent move to have no pre-work. I mean, before we always asked people to, you know, either do a 90-day plan or, you know, if it's a marketing role, prepare a marketing plan for a particular product along with a timeline, or, you know, all pretty standard stuff. But of course, if it's done in advance, polish can mask kind of true reality or capability of an individual. And it's quite a lot of work. So I was also thinking on that side of it, the candidate side of it. So we moved to completely live tasks in our most recent set of interviews. And I was a bit nervous about it myself. How will that land? Will they feel like they're being tested? So I made sure it wasn't a surprise on the spot. But yes, moving to live tasks. So and you know, when the candidates came into our offices, we set the task. They didn't know what it was going to be beforehand, so a bit like an exam. We didn't invigilate though. We left them with a coffee and a nice view out the window, and gave them quite a short amount of time actually. And we didn't say no AI use. We said it's really up to you, but this is what you've got to do. This is the time you've got, and here's a pen and paper just in case you want to think, write down. However you want to do it is entirely up to the candidate. And what I was really after was that kind of raw thinking that, who was excited by the idea of the task being like that, who was able to thrive in that environment. And then really it's the output. What are you thinking about? How do you organize your thoughts and how you think back, basically. We did find that it felt liberating for the candidates not having that pre-work that they might have to juggle in their weekends and evenings alongside their full-time job. And I felt we had a better output at the end, actually. I thought we could definitely do it again.
Good. That's brilliant to hear, Katie. And just so we can better understand exactly what it was you did for that live task. So you gave them the option if they wanted to use AI. So they had a laptop there, and you gave them around 30 minutes with a brief, and then it was up to them whether or not they just jotted things down on a piece of paper or picked up the laptop and did what they wanted there.
Yes, exactly. And we could have, but we didn't sort of ask to use AI. But it was interesting. A couple of candidates had a very similar style of answer, and another couple of candidates had completely different answers to the same. Well, not that it's an answer when it's the kind of a plan, but it was just really interesting, and it felt like you just saw a very different way that someone would approach a task, which I was kind of looking for, really. Yeah,
it does. It gives a really fair and balanced approach. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And Chantal, I'll come to you for this next one, if that's all right. And thinking about the opposite, where might you say hiring processes sometimes fall short in really revealing someone's strengths?
I think it's really great to hear Katie's experience there of a refreshing approach and a new approach and great feedback from candidates. So thank you for sharing. And I think on the flip side of examples like that, where I think sometimes we can accidentally focus a bit more on someone's confidence rather than their competence in their process. And again, where we're allowing people to provide lots of polished information that can sometimes allow that and encourage that. But actually, not everyone's brilliant at having interviews. They're find them quite stressful when we look forward to an interview. And others might be struggling in the interview, but might be really, really good when they start the role. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, it's good to have those different data points that we're looking at to assess their capability, because it might not just be one's communication style or style of assessing them is right for their personality or their style, and we might be missing out on great talent as a result. And we've obviously, for a number of years now, used behavioural style interviews, and they've been popular for a very long time, whether it's always usually been at least one element of the recruitment process. And I think actually that is helpful because it allows the candidate to share their experience and kind of that past experience and past skills, and the way they talk about them is a good predictor about how they might work going forward and their mindset, their approach to working. And it gives us a great opportunity to really probe that further. With AI, for example, when they're helping with kind of polishing that story, they can't help us tell us how they've made those decisions or what they've learned or how they've adapted. And so I think it's really important as part of the hiring process that we address that and be curious when we're asking questions and moving through the recruitment process to make sure that we're really exploring those different areas. And I think I would say as well, sometimes hiring process can sometimes fall short when we kind of don't think about all of the candidates that we're trying to attract. We want to attract diverse candidates in terms of the demographics, the age, gender, race, and sometimes we don't always think about that. So, for example, neurodivergent candidates, we don't always think best about the experience for them and how we can support them. People returning from family-friendly leave who've been out of work for a little while and focusing on their family. It could be particularly stressful coming back into the workplace or interviewing for a new role. Or even people who speak English isn't their mother tongue, and so again it's more challenging in terms of having that interview process as well. So I think good hiring really is helpful about kind of considering all those different aspects and making sure that we're really creating a positive candidate experience for everybody based on their different needs. That can be through simply asking them what they might need, what might be helpful throughout the process as well, and then the process to support them as well, so that they can do the best at the interview and best through the recruitment process.
Yeah, absolutely. Music to my ears, Chantal. I couldn't agree more. And you know, I'm a true believer in focusing on what people can do, not what they can't do or what they haven't done. You know, a lot of it is about attitude and aptitude, and I think that's where we're starting to see how alternative applications are evolving and coming through as a brilliant way of diversifying the talent pool and making sure that we're engaging with all different types of individuals. Because when you think about early careers professionals coming into the workplace now, they might have had a period of you know, straight after university, there was lockdown. They might not yet have even worked in an in-person office environment. So we need to really adapt and evolve our way of attracting applicants so that they can present themselves in such a way that allows them to show their true selves. So whether that could be through, you know, inviting them to do a little video introduction of who they are rather than a CV or something along those lines. You know, we don't need to necessarily rely wholeheartedly on purely a CV. It can be a brilliant tool, but there's other ways as well, and alternative techniques that can be used to make sure we're really encouraging a broad and diverse pool of applicants. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Chantal. And this next question, if it's all right, I'll also direct to you. So when thinking about how to build a process that really allows candidates to show up as themselves while still giving the hiring manager enough to make a confident decision, how might you suggest someone could build a process that allows that to happen?
Yeah, I think you both mentioned, yourself and Katie, about the importance of being respectful of candidates' time. It's really great taking the time to apply for a role at our organisation, to have the best experience as part of that. And so I think one area that can support that is being really transparent about the process in terms of time communication. That can make a real difference to their candidate experience, telling them what to expect. So, you know, at the start, you will have a good idea in terms of what the recruitment process will look like. So you can share that with candidates. You know, when can they expect to hear back if they're shortlisted next stage? What does the next stage look like? When you're expecting to make a final decision, so that people can be really informed at the start of the process about what it looks like. And that can really alleviate some of the nerves and uncertainty for them as well. We hear many stories about candidates unfortunately applying for roles and then disappearing to a black hole of application or being ghosted. Organisations, and I think having that respect for candidates is so important and so key, and really helps us to get the best out of them throughout the recruitment process as well. Might share what success looks like. So in terms of actually, what does a great experience look like, and what we're hoping to get from them as part of the recruitment process, so that they know what they're aiming for as well, I think is really valuable. We don't want candidates to spend lots of energy trying to decode what we're looking for or understand the process. We just want them to be able to show up and be themselves and be their best, because they're not confused about what you're looking for, what the process entails. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And one example that I liked is outside of publishing, but John Lewis Partnership, obviously an organisation we know really well, John Lewis and Waitrose, a couple of years ago, brought in a new process where they actually shared the interview questions with candidates.
Like that.
Yeah, me too, Katie. And I thought it was really lovely. It was really refreshing. And I know it had some people were saying, oh, well, you know, the candidates can just practice beforehand. You're not really testing them when they come in. But I love that they'd really put so much thought in terms of why they were doing this. And they talked about introducing it because they really wanted to level the playing field. And some of the things that we've said, like some people haven't had many interviews before, been kind of progressed through the career during COVID times, and that's been challenging. It really levels the playing field. Everyone knows what the questions are and can prepare for them in the same way. They have the same amount of time, which is really valuable. They talked about really getting to know the real person as well, which is great. As I say, we really want to understand the real candidate and make sure that the role is right for them and they're the right fit for the organisation, and that really helps with that too. Another reason for their approach was around wanting to stay true to their values, which I love. Their values are around transparency, fairness and respect. And so this approach really embodied that as well. And they also wanted to make sure they were attracting the right people and that they were right for each other, as I say. So they really wanted to make sure by having visibility of the questions, the candidates can see even from that, actually maybe this, what they're asking, the kind of challenges they're talking about maybe isn't the right fit for me, or actually it's exactly the thing that I would love and be excited about. So it enables candidates to decide for themselves as well whether actually this is a process that I want to be engaged in, I want to progress with, which is great for them. We're not being respectful of the candidate's time, not wasting their time. And equally for John Lewis Partnership as well, they're not getting applicants not really sure or not really committed. So I think it's really helpful from that perspective. So I really like that they were doing that, and I thought it allowed people to be prepared better for the interviews. It meant there was less anxiety for them. It meant they could be more authentic in their performance, and ultimately it helps make better hiring decisions as well. So I think that's a really nice approach, and it was nice to see that brought in a couple of years ago, and they still do it now as well. I'm quite refreshing in the approach, because ultimately I'm always a strong believer that recruitment processes aren't about trying to catch people out or trying to people. We want people to enjoy as much as you can the recruitment process, but getting to learn about the organisation, getting to understand more about the role, whether it's right for them, and equally for the organisation to in turn learn about the candidate as well, and whether they're best and the right fit for the role. So it's very much a two-way process, and I think it really supports that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on there, Chantal. I think naturally an interview process is a two-way process. It's just as much for the candidate to get as much from the process as they can as it is for the company that's hiring, and to be able to give them the questions in advance, it allows them to think it through, because in reality, in our normal day-to-days, how often do we actually just give that very quick, hasty, or maybe knee-jerk response to anything we're doing? We take our time, we think it through, we maybe do some research, we maybe chat it through with a colleague. So a quick fire round of interview questions is perhaps not the most natural environment for someone to perform. And it's all well and good to see how someone might perform under pressure, but there's just different ways of doing that, isn't there? So yeah, really interesting to hear you say that, Chantal. Thank you. And Katie, on to you. What might you say comes when thinking about how much of this comes down to the hiring manager themselves, when thinking about that sort of environment where candidates feel able to do their best work during a process? What would you say the best hiring managers do differently when it comes to truly assessing a candidate's capability?
Well, again, I hope I build nicely on what Chantal said, really, because I do think it's down to the hirer to get the best out of the candidate. To me, that's allowing them to feel relaxed and at home. And there's so many tiny little things that build up to that. But ultimately, I think that hiring is as much about you selling the company, the role, the people in the team, how their job is going to be, as it is about you finding the right fit for the role. So I always come at it thinking like that. So then I think there's lots of little bits that go into it. So for instance, I always ask for a particular room. I want to have one that's got a nice view, lots of natural light. I like it to be a longer walk from reception. So I always like to hand pick up a candidate and then have that walk, because I do think that's part of making someone feel relaxed, giving a little bit of yourself in that walk. We have a very wonky old office, so we often get lost, and I think you can have a bit of a giggle about it. Even though I've worked here for 10 years, I'm still lost in my own office. Just to make someone feel relaxed and at ease, I think is really important. I think, a drink, all these little things build up to how someone initially feels, that first impression of an organisation, because if they're right for you, you want them to feel that you're right for them ultimately. And then I think, coming back to the point, so Eve, I love the John Lewis example. When I read that, I just thought, that actually works for me, seeing questions in advance, because the worst thing is when you've done an interview and you're like, I didn't talk about this and I didn't talk about that, and I had this great an example and that's going to bother me for the next 3 weeks. So I do think that is a really nice thing. And then it's really down to the hirer to be very expert at their follow-up questions, to really understand, dig deeper. It's a bit like an iceberg, isn't it? You want to see what lies beneath and really understand a candidate. I think that's what I would say.
Very good. Yeah, I think that sounds a fantastic approach. So refreshing, Katie. And it's true that walk down the corridor to the interview room is so important. It's so crucial. The icebreaker, the building the rapport, the putting someone at ease, and it enables them to be their true self.
Yeah.
So it's such a nice example. Thank you for sharing that. And at what moments, Katie, might you say in a hiring process, do you think it becomes most important to pause, sense check, and make sure that you're really seeing the full picture of a candidate in a process?
I mean, I think all the way through, I think it's really important to have a process that doesn't drag too long, but equally as important is to have one that takes time to get holistic feedback from everyone who's had touch points with the candidate. And I also think AI is just brilliant actually at some of this stuff as well. So if for instance, you're having a screener online interview as the first step, which is what we did recently with a wider pool of people than we took to in person. I think AI is really helpful in that because it can iron out any bias that can come in. It can also remind you, like, Claude's like, Katie, but you said this was the focus of the role. And what we hear and what we take in sometimes need that kind of rational challenger to it. So I think that's where you can use AI really, really cleverly and really well. And then, I just think it's really important to have the different touch points, the different points of view from a wider team of people. And then I think it's also good to be nimble. So if you feel like you didn't quite get enough out of someone or there's a follow-up question, don't be shy to go back, because you want to make sure you have got all of the information, nothing left, no stone unturned, so that you can make the right decision. And that's also completely fair for the candidate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that end Q&A section of an interview can be a brilliant opportunity as well for the candidates to cover anything that they might not have had an opportunity to reveal, because quite often someone's being able to present their skills and experience based on the questions that are asked. And if a question that is asked doesn't necessarily enable that candidate to talk about a particular experience, then that Q&A at the end can sometimes be a good way for them to, showcase a specific example that they might not yet have covered. So, those are great examples, Katie. Thank you. And thank you both for sharing all the different examples and perspectives that you've shared there. I know that we've got some questions coming in through from the audience on the comments. And we've touched on the different interview formats today. And I am conscious that, for instance, when we were talking about the interview task that you undertook, Katie, for a recent process, that was in person. But one of the questions that's come through is about when it's remote, is an exam still an ideal way of testing someone's capabilities? I wonder, Katie, if you have a specific perspective on testing someone remotely.
Yes, and I'm very well aware that not all jobs are in office environments. So I think the kind of principle remains the same, is that if you don't always want it to be pre-polished and to level the playing field a little bit, then that kind of exam, as you call it, could still be remotely done. I think the principle behind it is exactly the same. That is kind of on the spot, and it tests someone, how they approach a task and what their kind of capabilities would be for a similar real life task in the job. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I think we discussed before, you can always have that disclaimer encouraging someone to showcase where they have harnessed the use of AI, how they've used it to show who they are. So even if it's a live task but done remotely, they might have 30 minutes to do it online, but they'll be maybe making little notes on how they've used AI throughout that. Yeah, good question. Thank you, John. I wondered if there's any other questions that the audience might like to ask. At the moment, I can't see any coming through, but was there anything that we haven't covered here today, Katie or Chantal, that you wanted to share with the audience today? As I always say to candidates, do ask that in an interview process so that people have the chance to share their different insights. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
I mean, I did really like when, Chantal, you were talking about sort of thinking about the different types of candidates you want to attract, and it sort of reminded me. So we have a few apprentices in our organisation. We work with LDN apprenticeships for bringing more diverse background people into publishing, and we do a completely different process there, really, and it's much more kind of a live task for a whole day. So a person feels very comfy over a longer period of time doing various different types of tasks that would be in those ultimately absolutely first roles in any organisation. And I guess the point there is sort of really thinking about the candidates you want to attract and changing things around in interview processes for different roles, but also as AI or other technologies evolve.
Yeah, very true, Katie. Thank you for sharing that. And interestingly, another question has come through from Alex in Indonesia, who's been asking about how to encourage how AI might be embraced in a workplace. So, for instance, if you've got an organisation which might have a multi-generational workforce, there might be, in some levels, a bit of reticence or, fear of using AI in some ways. And I think sometimes from those people that are more used to using AI, maybe in their workflows or day to day, it'll be important for them to know how to highlight the benefits of that. But I wonder, Chantal, have you got any specific tips on how maybe a different generation could encourage another to harness and leverage the benefits of AI in a workplace?
Yeah, and I would say an organisation I worked in a few years ago, actually, and it was when AI was becoming quite prominent and was a new thing to organisations. We had a really visionary CEO who really embraced AI and said, it's here, it's going to be here to stay. So I don't want people to be afraid of using it. I really want people to experiment with it and feel psychologically safe to be able to do that. And we also have to do that as well. And she really talked about that and partnered with our head of IT at the time as well about the offering that AI can provide. And we were really encouraged as a workforce to play around with AI, not to be scared of it, just experiment, play around. They talked about what tools the company was supportive of us using. But equally, obviously, there's a plethora of AI tools out there. If there were other tools that we found or wanted to try, then we were really encouraged us to raise that with IT. Say, I found this, can I have a go? It's great. It created, because it was kind of new to most people. Everyone was experimenting with it, but it created a nice, safe environment for us to do that. And we had a mix of demographics in terms of the workforce, in terms of ages, and some people who are more technically minded and excited about it, us we included, who are a bit like, oh, what's this? And it really encouraged us to talk to each other. And we did lots of sessions as well as an organisation where people would share where they'd used it. So it was a creative design agency. And it was really great to hear the creative designers had the projects that they'd done using it, because people had been a bit fearful at first, like, oh, well, I'll take all the creativity away. And actually, they're like, no, this really helped us with this project. This is how we used it. And it was really inspiring for other people. So I really think creating that psychologically safe environment where people are encouraged to try and test and be open about what they're using. So we don't want people using tools secretly, but actually be really open about what they're using and sharing those experiences with others is really helpful.
That's great advice.
Curious, isn't it? Like it's so lovely being curious and letting yourself kind of go off, and particularly if you're doing it as a group, right?
Yeah, because you can bounce ideas off one another. We quite often do what's called lunch and learns, So you have the opportunity to share with your colleagues the way you might use it and how it can benefit them as well. Brilliant. Great. Well, I think we've come to the end of our questions there. So I will just leave by saying thank you so much to Katie and Chantal for sharing all your fantastic insights today. And thank you very much to everyone in the audience who's joined us and contributed to today's discussion. I think if there's one takeaway from today's conversation, it's that while AI is changing hiring, great recruitment is still fundamentally about the people, and people are the vehicle to any organisation's success. So those organisations, I think, that are making the best hiring decisions are combining thoughtful assessment with human judgment, really creating processes that help candidates demonstrate what they can really do. So thank you both very much, Chantal and Katie. And if anyone in the audience would like to continue the conversation, I'd encourage you to take a look at the resources that we've got in the Inspired Library, where you might find that there's some blogs in there that explore some of today's themes. And if you haven't already, do check out and participate in our poll of the week. It's been really good to see the different range of perspectives from people professionals and hiring managers and talent leaders. So do take a look there. And finally, of course, if you'd like to discuss anything that we've chatted through today, or any hiring processes or different approaches or challenges that you're facing, please do feel free to reach out and get in touch with any one of the Inspired team. We'd be delighted to help. So I will just leave by saying thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next Inspired Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.